Most people know Corey Big Hoss Harrison as the loyal grandson who grew up inside the gold and silver pawn shop, the kid who turned into the shop's dependable manager. But few ever realized how far he was from owning the place he devoted his entire life to. As the years passed, Corey kept showing up, working harder, taking on every responsibility that was thrown his way, while legal documents and old family decisions quietly shut him out. And by the time he learned the truth, the business he helped build was already slipping out of his hands. The beginning of a legacy that wasn't meant for him. Corey Harrison's story begins long before Pawn Stars ever became a television phenomenon. Born on April 27, 1983, to Rick Harrison and Kim Harrison, Corey entered the world just a few blocks from the small pawn shop that would one day become famous. His grandfather, Richard the Old Man Harrison, and his grandmother, Matilda, opened the gold and silver pawn shop in 1988 with a simple structure, a 50-50 partnership, no outside investors, and no complicated ownership tree. That decision, made long before Corey understood the meaning of ownership or inheritance, would ultimately define the rest of his life. As a child, Corey practically lived inside the shop. He toddled past shelves stacked with gold ingots, vintage guitars, and casino artifacts left behind by gamblers chasing luck. By the age of 9, he was already helping with small tasks, absorbing pawn business knowledge the same way most kids learn multiplication tables. And when he grew older, he didn't drift away like many teenagers do. He doubled down, working long hours, managing inventory, and slowly building the hard-earned trust of both Rick and the old man. But even as Corey grew into a cornerstone of daily operations, the ownership structure remained untouched. Rick Sr. still held his original 50%, and Matilda still held hers. No shares were ever subdivided or reassigned, no trusts established, no inheritance plans drafted that included Corey. Years passed, seasons changed, and Pawn Stars began filming in 2009. But the legal paperwork stayed frozen in the 1980s. When Matilda passed away with no detailed will, her 50% stake legally defaulted back to her surviving spouse, the old man, under Nevada intestacy law. That meant Corey never had a chance, not even a theoretical one, to inherit her stake. Long before Corey realized it, the path to ownership was already closing. The shop he loved would never legally belong to him, not because of anything he did, but because of documents written decades before he knew what equity even was. The rise of a manager who didn't know the truth. As Corey entered adulthood, the gold and silver pawn shop became more than a family business. It became his identity. By his early 20s, he was running day-to-day operations, overseeing more than 30 employees, negotiating high-value deals, and managing the pressure that came with a shop suddenly thrust into worldwide fame. Pawn Stars premiered in 2009 and instantaneously transformed the quiet Las Vegas storefront into a global brand. Millions of viewers watched Corey grow from a hard-working kid into the reliable force behind the counter. His instincts, quick decisions, and ability to read customers made him indispensable. But while the cameras showed laughter and banter, Corey's real struggle was invisible. He assumed that his decades of loyalty would eventually be rewarded with formal ownership. He believed that one day his name would naturally join the list of legal partners. After all, he was the grandson who stayed, the one who joined the shop before he even hit double digits, the one who didn't walk away when success arrived. Yet behind the scenes, nothing changed. The partners remained the same, Rick Harrison and the old man. The legal structure remained untouched because no one ever revisited the documents that had been written back when the shop was just another struggling Las Vegas business. In Season 7 of Pawn Stars, Corey finally cracked. Frustrated with carrying more responsibility than anyone except his father, he told Rick and the old man that he deserved a 10% stake. It was a bold move, a mix of desperation and hope. But instead of the ownership he fought for, he received a compromise, a raise and a promise of a 5% future stake that never became legally binding. To him, it was better than nothing. To viewers, it looked like progress. But in reality, it didn't change the paperwork, the deeds, the signatures, or the laws that controlled the business. Corey kept working harder, believing that patience would eventually deliver justice. But he didn't know the truth, that the shop's future ownership was already locked in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The death that changed everything. In June 2018, everything Corey believed about his future changed in a single heartbreak. On June 25th, Richard, the old man Harrison, passed away at age 77 after a long battle with Parkinson's disease. For Corey, it wasn't just the loss of a grandfather, it was the loss of the one person who had shaped his work ethic, his values, and his love for the pawn business. They had spent 15 years working shoulder to shoulder, arguing, laughing, and building a shop that millions of viewers would eventually adore. Losing him created a silence in the store that Corey could never fully fill. But the emotional loss was only the first blow. The second came quietly, wrapped inside legal documents that had been finalized long before Corey ever thought to question them. The old man's estate plan was simple, some say too simple, and his entire 100% stake, including the portion he inherited from Matilda, went directly to Rick Harrison Jr. There were no special provisions for grandchildren, no carved-out percentages, no conditional shares, no path for Corey to inherit anything. When this reality hit, Corey realized that his decades of sweat, loyalty, and sacrifice had no legal weight. His role remained the same: manager, employee, and television personality, but never owner. The decisions he helped enforce, the millions of dollars he negotiated, and the responsibility he carried across seasons were all built on trust, not ownership. At the same time, personal tragedies kept piling on him. In 2024, his younger brother Adam died at just 39 years old from a fentanyl overdose, sending Corey into another wave of grief. He had barely recovered from losing the old man when life took another piece of his heart. And in 2023, his DUI arrest in Las Vegas damaged his public image and caused more tension inside the family, at a time when he was already emotionally drained. Through all of this, Corey kept showing up to work. He kept filming. He kept pushing forward. But deep down, he was beginning to understand a truth he never wanted to face. The shop he dedicated his whole life to could never truly belong to him. Not legally, and maybe not even symbolically. The legal wall Corey could never climb. After the old man's passing, Corey assumed there might still be a chance. Some legal door, some forgotten clause, some backdated agreement that could give him even a fractional stake. But the deeper attorneys dug into the foundation of the gold and silver pawn shop, the clearer it became that Corey's path to ownership was blocked by forces far more complicated than family decisions. The shop's structure, built in 1988 as a two-partner general partnership, was never designed to allow a second generation to inherit shares automatically. No additional equity classes had ever been created. No operating agreement ever mentioned children or grandchildren, and the family never drafted a buy-sell addendum allowing descendants to purchase or claim future equity. When Pawn Stars became a global hit, restructuring the business might have been possible, but the whirlwind of filming schedules and licensing deals pushed those conversations aside. Then came another barrier: Nevada's pawn licensing laws. The moment a new equity partner is introduced, the entire license must be reevaluated, and every owner must undergo strict background checks, financial audits, and federal anti-money laundering compliance. For a business as heavily regulated as a pawn shop operating on Las Vegas Boulevard, even adding a 1% owner could trigger months of delays, new filings, and thousands of dollars in regulatory fees. And even if the licensing could be handled, the tax consequences were harsh. Any shares given to Corey would be treated as a taxable gift from Rick Jr., potentially costing hundreds of thousands in gift taxes. A discounted sale might trigger IRS scrutiny, especially with the show's royalties and intellectual property rights tied to the business. Corporate counsel ultimately advised that adding Corey as an owner would require rewriting decades of contracts, with the History Channel, with lenders, with vendors, and even with the city of Las Vegas. Behind closed doors, the conclusion was painful but unanimous. Keeping the ownership structure exactly as it was, 100% under Rick Jr., was legally safer, financially cleaner, and operationally simpler. Corey wasn't excluded out of malice, nor because his work was undervalued, but because the cost of changing the structure had grown too large to overcome. For Corey, that explanation offered logic, but not comfort. He had put in the work. He had earned the trust. But the documents controlling the business didn't care about loyalty or sweat equity. They cared about signatures, dates, and statutes. The brotherly bond that complicated everything. Even with all the legal and regulatory barriers in place, there was still one more layer shaping Corey's fate. The relationship between him and his older brother, Rick Harrison Jr. They grew up together in the aisles of the pawn shop, patching floors, counting inventory, and learning how to survive in a business where mistakes were expensive. But from childhood, their father, Rick Sr., trained them differently. Rick Jr. became the numbers guy, the analyst, the evaluator, the final voice on high-value deals. Corey became the operational backbone, the one who kept the shop running, the one staff depended on, the one fans connected with. When Pawn Stars exploded in 2009, those roles hardened. Cameras captured the banter, the arguments, the teasing, and the subtle hierarchy between them. Viewers often laughed when Rick Jr. pulled rank, but beneath every exchange, Corey knew the truth. His brother was the one being shaped for ownership. He was the one sitting next to Rick Sr. during big negotiations, the one absorbing the legal and financial responsibilities that came with running a multi-million-dollar brand. Still, their bond never broke. Behind the scenes, they had long conversations, sometimes heated, sometimes emotional, about the future of the shop and Corey's place in it. Corey joked on social media about wanting a piece of the pie, but inside those jokes was real longing. In 2015, during a charity event at Red Rock Casino, he admitted publicly that ownership had never been promised to him, but he was grateful for the life the shop gave him. His voice cracked slightly as he said, "I get to wake up every day doing exactly what I love. That's worth more than any piece of paper." But even gratitude can't erase desire. And as he watched Rick Jr. inherit the entire 100% ownership in 2018, Corey felt both pride and heartbreak. Pride that the business stayed in the family. Heartbreak that his decades of dedication, his sweat-soaked years on the showroom floor, and his sacrifices wouldn't be reflected in formal ownership. Yet instead of resentment, Corey chose acceptance. Their father's legacy mattered more to him than a stake certificate, and their family bond, tested by fame, tragedy, and public scrutiny, remained intact. But that acceptance carried a quiet ache that never fully disappeared. A future filled with possibilities, but no guarantees. As the years passed, Corey's role inside the gold and silver pawn shop continued to evolve, not through ownership, but through influence. He chaired inventory meetings, approved major purchases, mentored new employees, and became the public face of the shop alongside his father and brother. His compensation grew through performance bonuses, TV royalties, and licensing deals tied to the Big Hoss brand. On paper, Corey remained an employee. In practice, he functioned like a partner, just one without a vote, a stake, or a legal claim. Privately, discussions began surfacing about whether Corey could ever receive a formal share. Attorneys laid out creative possibilities. Profit interest units that wouldn't trigger licensing complications, non-voting shares issued through a holding company, or even a trust-based structure that would grant Corey beneficiary rights without altering the shop's tightly regulated ownership ledger. These options were promising, but each came with its own maze of licensing checks, tax implications, regulatory hurdles, and estate planning complexities. Behind all the legal talk was a simpler truth. Both brothers wanted the shop to remain united. Fragmented ownership could expose them to future disputes, government reviews, or licensing resets, and no one wanted to jeopardize the business their father had built from the ground up. Corey understood this more than anyone. He valued stability, family unity, and the legacy of the Harrison name. But even with that understanding, there were moments, quiet ones, when he wondered what it would feel like to see his name on an ownership document. Moments when he questioned whether decades of loyalty, sacrifice, and emotional investment should amount to more than a salary and a title. Yet, life has repeatedly taught Corey that nothing is simple. The DUI arrest in 2023, the heartbreaking loss of his younger brother Adam in 2024, and the constant pressure of fame forced him to rethink what truly mattered. Ownership was important, but healing was more important. Stability was more important. Family was more important. Today, Corey remains the emotional anchor of the gold and silver pawn shop, beloved by fans, trusted by staff, and respected by his brother. He may not hold legal ownership, but he holds something that can't be transferred, taxed, inherited, or signed away, the shop's soul. And in many ways, that has become his form of ownership, one built not on paper, but on a lifetime of loyalty no document could ever capture. Corey may never own the shop legally, but do you think he deserves a share after everything he has given to it? Let me know your thoughts below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story.